222 horse at BCTC, and we're covering both urban blues and rhythm and blues. We're in the early 1950s, covering some material here. And here's some overview material. What's really helpful is if you'll, in your textbook, read the background information on pages 12, 13, 14, and 15, and 16 before you get into the chapters. It's a great narrative that gives us good background for the 1950s, and the chronological chart I find to be very helpful. But here are some overview points from that area. We're looking at post-World War II as a period of prosperity and the baby boom. U.S. has its involvement in the Korean conflict. We've got the McCarthyism, the Red Scare. This is Senator Joseph A. McCarthy. The anti-communist sentiment that was rampant in the nation, blacklisting of musicians, artists, and political figures. Global racism was going on, racism in the U.S., along with the apartheid policy in South Africa being implemented. So during all this period of prosperity, it's not for everybody. The prosperity is mainly middle and upper class white families, not, and it really did exclude a lot of black families. So we also have Martin Luther King Jr. emerging as an important civil rights leader. We've got the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott, and many other points during this chronological chart. Also, the beginning of the space race, 1957, the USSR, the Soviet Union, sent Sputnik 1 and 2 into orbit, followed by the U.S. launching of Explorer 1. We have, at the end of the decade, the Paola scandal that's investigated by Congress as a response to unethical practices in broadcasting, and we'll get more into that in chapter 4. And 1959, Alaska and Hawaii become states. Some musical highlights. Country musicians, so mainly white musicians, begin to cover African American blues recordings. This category of race music is renamed Rhythm and Blues in the 1950s. And throughout the decade, it becomes more and more popular with white audiences as well. Rhythm and Blues eventually shortened to R&B. Car radios become commonplace. That means this technology, more broadcasting dollars. TVs are affordable. The American Bandstand, television broadcast of popular music and rock and country and blues and so forth, that starts in the 1950s. So more commercial over TV as well. White groups start covering black blues, doo-wop, and rhythm and blues song. And when I say cover, that means they're performing another artist's work, redoing it, releasing a new album. Our first section is Urban Blues and Rhythm and Blues for Chapter 2. And there we have Urban Blues, the great migration of African Americans from the South, where the boll weevil has destroyed the cotton crop during 1914 to 1918 during World War I. This is what really starts urban blues. We move from the rural blues of Mississippi Delta and so forth. Those musicians are traveling north for better working conditions, better pay, and better civil liberties. I mean, it's still lots of segregation and racism, but it was better than the South at the time. Musical traditions from the rural South are brought north, and the electric guitar is added to the rural blues and becomes urban blues. T-Bone Walker is a notable name, along with B.B. King. And there's B.B. King, real name Riley B. King, from Mississippi, initially a Delta blues musician. He's known as being a very lyrical and expressive solo style on the guitar, and he's a direct influence to rock musicians Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, and Jimi Hendrix. The 3 o'clock blues is the piece that you need to listen to on Spotify, and it's located on page 9. And the blues, it's a 12-bar blues example. We've got Chicago blues coming up next, even more localized and more developed than just urban blues. We've got the west and south sides as centers of African American population. By the end of World War II, there's more than 400,000 African Americans filling these neighborhoods. And electric guitar combination of urban blues, we're also adding elements of swing and boogie-woogie piano playing. That gives Chicago blues a bit more depth. Chess Recording Studios, owned by Phil and Leon Chess, it's key to recording this style of blues. And a couple key musicians, Willie Dixon, Muddy Waters, Elmore James, Howlin' Wolf, and John Lee Hooker. And there is John Lee Hooker, who in 1980 was in the Blues Brothers film, and that's the pick from him from the credit scene. There we've got Muddy Waters, lived from 1913 to 1983. Real name McKinley Morganfield. I mean, he's a guitarist, a blues singer, a singer-writer, and he's also noted for using the bottleneck slide on the guitar. And our examples from 1954, Hoochie Coochie Man, and it's a 12-bar blues, and it uses the blues scale 6 notes repeatedly. Page 22. Next up, Rhythm and Blues. Okay, this is the next step in development, and we've got originally classified as race music. It's this new category that they're rebranding it as Rhythm and Blues. It's a popular dance form. So the blues is more of a guttural, sad, sorrowful music, and often slower tempos. Rhythm and blues as a category, happier, joyful, upbeat, okay? Heavy backbeats on 2 and 4 in a 4-bar measure. That feeling of the feeling of 1, 2, 3, 4. The heaviness on 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Louis Jordan, Bo Diddley, and Professor Longhairs are the people that are spoken about in the chapter. There's Bo Diddley, lived from 1928 to 2008. Real name Elias Bates. He has kind of a strum rhythmic guitar player, throbbing pulse, and the dance beat. It's so important. Bo Diddley plays drum-like rhythms on the guitar, and you'll hear that in the tune Bo Diddley recorded in 1955. And the outline is on page 25. Okay, chapter 3. Another direction that leads us to the beginning of rock and roll in the 1950s is gospel and country music. Okay, so it's really traditional blues and then the up-tempo dance blues plus gospel music and plus country music. That brings us probably most directly in the late 1950s to rock and roll, which is our chapter 4 lecture. So spirituals. Before you get to gospel music, you have to know what a spiritual is. A spiritual is a religious folk song specific to an ethnic group. So you can have spirituals from England, from Wales, from Germany, from Africa, just all over the world. Specifically, when we're talking about gospel music, we're talking about African American spirituals of the mid-19th century. And they have a specific style where call and response is used. The call is the question or the leader or the melody line sung by a leader. The response is a choir or a group of singers backing up the leader. So the leader sings out a phrase, the choir group sings it back in a response style. So The lead singers also used to improvise melodies as well. An example of a spiritual would be "This Wade in the Water" that I've got over here. Another one would be "Nobody I've Seen." Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. So spirituals often have the African American spirituals of the mid 19th century often have a double meaning, that they're meant for worship and glorifying of God, but they also talk about being oppressed in slavery and trying to break free from that oppression. Here we have gospel music. Okay, when you take the spiritual call and response roots of West Africa and you incorporate European instruments and regular rhythms and beats of European traditions, you get gospel music. It's a blended style and it's a sacred music style, just like the spiritual is sacred for church worship and so forth. So is gospel music, or it's to be listened to outside of church, but it's still context is religious. Soulsters, Sam Cooke, and Edwin Hawking singers are examples of very commercially successful and popular gospel groups. Usually groups of 4 or 5 men, sometimes women as well. And a feature of this type of group is men singing falsetto and a melisma or an embellishment, where they on a long syllable you'll have an embellishment or some extra notes added to that song. Like example would be a pop singer singing the national anthem where they're going, "Oh, say, can you see?" They're embellishing that. They're adding a melisma. That's a melisma. Um, Excuse me for my terrible singing there. Sam Cooke and the Soulsters. Sam Cooke lived from 1931 to 1964. He's a rock singer and he's a gospel singer. The Soulsters are a group from Texas, and they feature Cooke as their lead vocalist. And there's that falsetto where the male singer sings above their speaking range, so it's in that upper range, head voice range. And How Far from Canaan, recorded in 1952, is the example. And there in the picture, you can see a typical group of a lead singer and 4 or 5 singers backing them up. Edwin Hawking singers, we've got the difference between this one and the Soulsters recording is this is a recording of 6 individuals, and Edwin Hawking is a bigger choir, um, more musicians, and also use of a piano, bass, and drums, and full rhythm section. The other recording we just have drums backing him up. The other gospel recording I just mentioned. So check out "Oh Happy Day," recorded in 1969, after our decade that we're talking about, but it's of the same style. Doo-wop. Okay, what in the world is doo-wop? Doo-wop is gospel music, but changing the words and context. It's not religious music, it's secular music, so music of the world. And it's basically just a gospel quartet or quintet style, and they're going to sing about other stuff. Okay, some examples of this would be groups like the Mill Brothers, the Ink Spots, the Orioles, Chords, Crew Cuts, and Drifters. Very popular style before rock and roll takes on, and a direct link as well to rock and roll. And here's a group, the Orioles. They're from Baltimore Oriole. That's their name. Um, and it's essentially initially a black gospel vocal style. And "Crying to the Chapel" is an example of an AABA 32 bar song form, which is the same song form as Tin Pan Alley in American musicals. You've got an A section that happens again, and then you got the B, often called the bridge, contrasting material, and then that original A material comes back. And then after you sing that 32 bars, the next verse starts and they sing that form of chords and melody layout again. Okay, here's a band actually called The Chords. They're a duo, Bam and Shaboom, 1954. And if you've seen the movie Little Nemo, it's featured in that film. We've got a vocal band accompanied by guitar, strings, bass, drum, and saxophone. And often there's a cover of the same tune. The Crew Cuts were a Canadian white doo-wop group, and they cover the Chords hit, and they also have a hit with the same tune. It's an their version is a little simpler in their form, but they use a bigger orchestra to back up the group, so more saxophones and trumpets and trombones and some um, drums, rhythm section, so forth. It's a bigger sound. Um, so next, the Drifters, the last doo-wop group, and the reason why it's mentioned in the chapter is for this doo-wop chord progression, and here it is. I've got a Roman numerals that probably doesn't mean a lot to a lot of you folks, but this is the chord 1, and one chord again, then the 4 chord with a 7th on top of it, then a 6 chord with a 7th, then a 4 major chord, and then a 6 chord, and then a 5 chord with the 7th on it, also known as the dominant 7th happening twice. Okay, that's a lot of technical music information if you're not a jazz or rock or blues musician. That probably is going way over your head. That's just a common motion of roots and chords that are used in doo-wop that also are patterned in rock and roll. When we get to that. All right, cover. I mentioned the cover a couple of times. And our example in the text is that Shaboom. That's what the practice of re-recording another artist's songs. And this, most of the time, it's white groups recording black groups, doo-wop tunes, or rhythm and blues tunes. As long as the original writer is given credit for the song and the copyright is paid, or the royalties are paid, the original song owner really doesn't have control over new versions being made. At least that was the ruling back in the 1950s. So we had lots and lots of covers. And even today, we talk about covering a tune like a tribute band, like a Led Zeppelin tribute band or a Dave Matthews tribute band or anybody, Beyonce. If she's not in town, but you have somebody else singing her music, that's covering it. Okay, so copyright, our current copyright length today is the composer or writer's death plus 70 years after that. So copyright protection is a long time these days. Next, the opposite side, we've mainly been talking about black musicians leading to the direct creation of rock and roll, but also there's this link to country music. And country music, originally called hillbilly music, is commercial folk music, originating basically British music solidifying around the Civil War. So it's been around for a bit. Um, its roots are in dance styles like jigs, reels, polkas, and waltzes. It features fiddle playing, often adding the banjo, and this western swing develops over time, often played in honky tonks or western bars or saloons. I've got a picture of the Grand Ole Opry stage there in Nashville. Give you a little bit of imagery of that. And our important early artists are Hank Williams Sr., the first of the Hank Williams, Jimmy Roberts, and Johnny Cash. And there's Hank Williams. There's a example of his tune "I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive," recorded in 1952, and the recording discussion is on page 39 of your text. Johnny Cash, the Man in Black, country singer's career developed really at the same time as the dawn of rock and roll. He signs on to Sun Records right around the same time as Elvis Presley. And his tune "I Walk a Line" in 1956 is pretty iconic and something you should take a listen to. Johnny Cash had a long career where he collaborated with musicians of lots of different genres. He didn't just play with country singers. One of the last tunes he covered and sang was a Nine Inch Nails tune, so a death metal tune. So 1932 to 2003, and that's it for this chapter as far as my video lecture goes.